welcome everyone. Good morning. Good morning. It is wonderful to see so many faces so early in the day. I do hope that we get to not only hear me speak, but get to hear one another speak and learn from one another throughout this session. So without further ado, to give you a bit of insight as to where we're heading in our time together today, overview of boundaries and role division, what to look out for, and signs of poor role division or poor boundaries in your organization or as a volunteer, setting best practices for yourself as a volunteer or for your organization that you're a part of. Case studies, we're going to dive in deep into one of two case studies, depending on your breakout room, and you'll get to examine a conflict from two different points of view, one in each case study, and then discuss like how would you react, what would next steps be, what additional boundaries might you need to set, as well as what additional training might you think about building out for your organization or requesting as a volunteer? Excuse me. We'll debrief from our breakout room session from the case studies and hope that y'all feel comfortable contributing to a shared mural board. I'll explain that a bit later. And then at the very end, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A and just sharing amongst one another. Full disclosure, I am in the world of refugee resettlement. I'm with the International Institute of New England and oversee both our internship program as well as our volunteer programs. So that's the sort of context that I'm coming from, and you'll see that in the case studies themselves. They might look a little skewed to the work that I do and the work that I'm involved in. However, I hope you are able to adapt that and take what is helpful for you into your own landscape, into your own organization or the own work that you do as a volunteer. I'm so excited that y'all have joined me and just want to reiterate our Zoom guide for today. If you would like to change your participant name or add your pronouns, please feel free to do so. Please feel free to add your affiliation for an organization or as a volunteer, whatever feels comfortable. We'd love to see your face and would invite you to turn your camera on, but definitely not mandatory. Please keep in mind that this is being recorded, so microphone muted. If at all possible, we will have time at the end to chat freely. If you find anything that resonates with you throughout our time together, please feel free to pop it in the chat. I'm not shy. I tend to, put a lot of, yes, I agree with that. Ooh, I'm curious how to implement that. If you have questions, comments, or sort of thinking through things, likely others in the room are as well. So please feel free to share that. And again, just a reminder, we will have plenty of time at the end. So please hold questions then, so I don't lose them in the chat here. When we're thinking about identifying boundaries, I tend to think about, questions you might ask yourself as a volunteer or as an organization, trying to assess where you're currently standing, where your current sort of lay of the land is. So I tend to ask myself these sorts of questions. What is stated? What is clearly available for volunteers to access, or what is clearly available to learn about an organization? What is going unsaid in those, everything we've put out and about for others to read? What might others not know? What might they still have remaining questions on? And perhaps we need to clarify in some way, shape, or form. What assumptions do we hold as either a volunteer or as an organization about what others know about our work, about these roles, about the boundaries already established? In my own line of work, that's often confronting, what do I think volunteers are coming in knowing about refugees and immigrants and specific challenges that our clients are facing? However, what assumptions do we think they might hold, the other might hold as a volunteer? What assumptions might the organization hold about you and your role within the organization, the skills that you come, the experience that you have working in this landscape, as well as, what assumptions might we assume volunteers hold about the work that we do as an organization. So keep those in mind. That might be a great starting place, though full caveat, I am not by any means the end all be all here. Others in the room will likely have much to say on this and things that have worked well in your organization. These are purely what things have worked well for me, and sort of sharing of resources and my own tips through lived experience in my work. What clarity can we gain about one another or working with and from one another? And how can we go about gaining that clarity? Is that setting up a sharing session? Is that setting up a listening session as an organization? Is that setting up a once a week volunteer check-in? Perhaps that happens regularly already. And how can we build out those structures as an organization to make folks feel comfortable coming to us when they have concerns? And likewise, how do we as volunteers feel that we can advocate on behalf of ourselves and really speak up and say, hey, actually, I don't know what you're talking about when you're using that acronym or when you're using that term, or what does that mean for this particular population? And how can we break down those barriers and provide clear and transparent communication so that everyone's on the same page? You'll see that's a running theme throughout our conversation today is clarity, patience, and a little bit of flexibility and humor. Always goes a long way. It helps to ask these sorts of questions for your organization and for yourself, but it's also crucial for organizations to identify what volunteers can and cannot do, whether that is mission-driven, staff or paid assistance versus volunteer support, and what legal responsibilities that might be sort of butting up against for an organization. I can speak at length about my own organization, and likely you can about yours, but just sort of thinking through what things, even if volunteers are eager to do those things, what can they do and what can they not go about doing based on what staff responsibilities are and other competing factors at your organization. There are many, many important points for setting boundaries and important points to note when creating boundaries or reestablishing boundaries for volunteers and as volunteers. First and foremost, I try to keep the success of the relationship at the forefront. We want to recognize, and I will say this 100 times over, volunteers and community members are vital to the success of the mission of my organization, of many, many organizations that utilize volunteers. And emphasizing that importance and emphasizing gratitude as an organization is of the utmost importance whenever I'm speaking with volunteers or communicating via email, via workshops or webinars, training, all that jazz. And really, as a volunteer, knowing that you are a vital piece of the puzzle, a vital piece of getting all of this work done is extremely important, and really not taking that lightheartedly, really knowing that, emphasizing that, and knowing that sort of follow through is equally important. And we're building a relationship here. As with any relationship, there will likely be challenges and communication gaps that need to be worked out over time. However, we hope that that does not stop folks from engaging in the work, from diving into volunteering, from diving into helping improve the processes, because we're all growing. This is a process and it will continue evolving. What boundaries are set today or tomorrow might need to be altered and adjusted as your organization expands or shifts or prioritizes competing or multiple interests. So always keep that in mind. It's an ever-evolving relationship. Success of the program is also extremely important to keep in mind when setting boundaries, when reestablishing boundaries, when deciding which roles are being completed by whom. We cannot solve every problem as an organization and as a volunteer, but that's why we're all in it together. We're all a part of the larger systems in place to either support the mission that the organization is working to achieve, to clients being supported by an organization. You know, we are all one piece of the puzzle, and knowing that we alone cannot solve everything is also key in sort of thinking through boundaries, thinking through establishing expectations and roles. Also, thinking through, you know, if your organization is client facing, emphasizing education and empowerment, teaching to do rather than doing for others. And I find that really crucial in my own organization, teaching volunteers and empowering volunteers to work directly with our clients, to then go on and teach them skills that they can utilize and feel empowered to use in their own lives, rather than, I see you need this one thing done. It's easy for me to do. Let me just do that for you. How is that, and how could that be a hindrance to any client-facing work that you're doing? And emphasizing that through trainings, through workshops, through conversations, and asking questions as a volunteer when you don't quite know how that might affect the overall mission or the goals or any client-facing work that might be done. Reducing frustration. Boundaries can absolutely reduce frustration, both as a volunteer, when you're working with an organization, knowing what you're supposed to be doing on any given day and time, knowing how your role might differentiate from another volunteer role, from an intern role perhaps, and certainly from a staff member's role. And on the opposite side, as an organization, knowing where volunteers fit into your mission, into your larger systems, into your program areas is crucial for not only your staff communication with volunteers and assigning of tasks and responsibilities and work that we're all going to get done at the end of the day, but also exploring, you know, how folks might be, and this goes back to assumptions, how folks might be unclear as to what those boundaries or role divisions might be. There are many different things going on at any given day and time. So establishing really clear-cut, essentially job descriptions for each position, I have found rather successful, and am working on increasingly implementing and putting into practice these things in my own organization, streamlining things. And I hope that you are also sort of looking for areas of improvement, as I always am. When everyone knows where they stand, instances of duplication of work, mix-ups, communication gaps, overall frustration can be mitigated, and hopefully will be mitigated. Liability, and this is sort of on the legal, sort of HR side of things. The organization must always keep in mind any legal guidelines or obligations, liability to protect itself, the clients, if there are any clients within the folds of your organization, as well as the volunteers that are equally working alongside you to get that mission done. As a volunteer, sort of thinking about liability and perhaps overstepping bounds when you're unclear might be wading into some deeper water and increasing risk for both you as a volunteer, but also as the organization. When roles aren't clearly defined and or when staff responsibilities are being taken on by non-staff members, for example, we might be tiptoeing into those more tricky scenarios. And I would guess HR and or any legal team that you're working with might not be overly happy with that. So just sort of a heads up and to something to keep in mind. Last but not least, and I certainly included this last because while it is important, it is not nearly as important for the work that I do, and I suspect the work that many of you are doing, as a relationship building, as sort of keeping everyone on the same page and building trust and listening skills and understanding and communication. But that is image. Thinking about the overall message, the mission, the way in which you want to be portrayed as a volunteer, the sort of, I don't know, if you're thinking about someone speaking behind your back, like, would they have nice things to say about you? Would they have positive things to say about you? What do you want to be known for? As well as an organization, thinking about, when folks are essentially being recruiters for you, when they're telling their friends, family, neighbors about the work that you're doing, are they saying positive things? And if not, how can we go about improving experiences and mitigating frustration and expanding our training and workshops and guides for success of our programs, as well as for success of that relationship that we're building with our volunteer network, with interns, with community partners, whomever might be in our cohort. Some signs to look out for, perhaps these are relevant in your organization, perhaps you are absolutely nailing it and these are not relevant at all, but there signs of poor boundaries or role division might include miscommunication or conflicting communication, conflicting information. Well, one staff member told me to do this and now you're telling me to do something else. What am I supposed to do? That's a little difficult to sort of assess as a volunteer. Multiple points of contact. If you have multiple sites, I know our organization does, so we do have one site-specific contact, but if they are unavailable, who else should folks go to? And having a backup point of contact. When can folks expect to be contacted back? And what sort of heads up do we give folks if we are absolutely inundated or out at a conference as we are today, to let them know that we might not be responding to emails sort of at the drop of a hat, but it might take a little more time to get back to folks. Communication after hours, and I sort of touched on this in addressing when folks should be communicating with one another. But if you have communication after hours beyond your typical office hours on a regular basis, because of course there are always ad hoc means of communication that are necessary for getting things done after hours, but that shouldn't be, hopefully, on a regular basis. Understanding that both volunteers should get their outside time. When you're not volunteering, you're not sort of expected to be on phone calls and assisting in the same way as you are sort of on the clock. And additionally, staff also need time to rest, recuperate, take time off to spend with loved ones, family, doing hobbies, whatever it might be. And that is how we continue doing our work, is setting those clear boundaries, setting those clear lines of communication and clear roles as to who you can expect answers from and when. Minimal supervisions, check-ins, or updates provided from the volunteer and from the organization. If you feel as a volunteer that, I'm sort of sent off and I never hear from folks again, well, that's not extremely helpful for the relationship building that we're doing, and also the success for sort of completing that task and returning back again and again. When you feel connected to an organization, oftentimes you feel more drawn in to help more or help on a regular basis, or at least come back again to give it another go. Additionally, as an organization, and you'll note that I'm oftentimes speaking as an organization because I am at an organization rather than as a volunteer, but setting up check-ins, whether they're weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, whatever that might be for your own capacity, and understanding that that might differ over the course of your year, depending on what else you have going on. as well as updates, providing updates for volunteers and their network, things that they can likely forward to their families and friends and others who might be interested in sort of what are the ins and outs, what's going on behind the scenes that I can't quite see by just joining their newsletter. That might look like weekly updates, might look like monthly, that might look like quarterly, depending on the size of your organization, depending on what else is going on. And I always lead fully transparent and say, look, we understand things are busy times. You might be on summer vacation, so you might not have capacity to volunteer. Likewise, we have just received, an influx of new clients, so on and so forth, and really explaining the current context surrounding our work, around their work as volunteers, around work that they can likely expect to be doing because things have shifted in priority or capacity has shifted. Important to keep in mind, and understanding that folks are doing their best. And so updates are helpful, transparent updates are even better, rather than sort of just a newsletter sort of update. Lack of or lacking resources, and we'll talk about this a bit more, but sort of thinking through what already exists at your organization or what exists as a volunteer. What can you seek out? What is already available for you? And what might need room for improvement? What might be expanded upon? Does that include building a guide for how to step-by-step processes, or more robust information about other areas of your work? They might be only seeing one small portion of your work, but what are we looking at here as a larger organization? Staff or volunteer frustration, and eventually, if this progresses far enough, job performance issues, which leads into the blame game. And we never want to be a part of that. We want to mitigate that as best as we can. But essentially, you didn't do that. I can't believe that. If things get far enough along, and hopefully they don't, but if they do, performance can suffer as a volunteer. Being frustrated, you feel like you cannot do your best work. So why go back? Why bother? This is clearly not a good fit, and sometimes it is not, and having that conversation is often challenging. And we can talk about that a bit later, but perhaps beyond the purview of today's discussion. But also as a staff member, if you're a staff member or you have colleagues that are working with volunteers and things are going awry, first, how can we mitigate that? But hopefully it has not progressed enough to where the staff member, whether yourself or a colleague, just wants to say, nope, too hard to work with volunteers. I just don't want them. It's easier for me to do it myself. Yikes, that's a lot of work that others could likely be assisting with and supporting with. But how can we do that in a constructive manner rather than someone taking on even more work, whether by choice or by circumstance? Thinking as a volunteer first, and then we'll switch as an organization, thinking through what goals you might want to accomplish in your role as a volunteer. When you're thinking about seeking out a position with an organization, when you're thinking about working with a new organization or redefining and thinking through an existing relationship, what are your goals? Is it to, or might it be, contributing to your community, using your skill set, learning a new skill set, learning a new avenue of support, eventually getting a paid position for this work? That would be amazing as a volunteer. Is it something else? Assessing that and sort of thinking through that at the get-go, or as we go along today and as you have a few moments throughout the day, sort of thinking through what your goals are is crucial. And then acting on those goals, and we'll see that here in a bit. Identifying your knowledge and potential gaps in your knowledge. As an organization, I can confidently say we do not expect volunteers to know everything, nor do we want you to know everything. Otherwise, we happily invite you to apply for a staff role instead, where your skills might be better suited. However, as a volunteer, know that you do not need to know everything, and you are not asked to know everything. We cannot possibly be an expert on all facets of all sectors of all work. At our organization and beyond. So identifying the knowledge, the skills, the experience that you bring to the table as a volunteer, identifying the responsibility that you currently have, whether it's in this role, whether it's other competing obligations and responsibilities beyond your volunteer work, as well as identifying your responsibilities and what you hope to take on in this role is key. What training might you need? What training have you received? And what gaps might there be? What training might you need in addition to what you've currently been provided? And advocating for yourself, knowing that folks likely don't know that you have a knowledge gap or you need additional training unless you tell them, unless you take it upon yourself to say, actually, I know nothing about what you just assigned me. Can you explain a bit more? Can you give me something in a different way? Folks have different learning styles, so perhaps verbally explaining something might not necessarily make most sense for everyone. Having a written step-by-step outline of that same process so that folks can sort of check off as they go might be more beneficial. Or perhaps a diagram or a video presentation. Adapting to and having multiple avenues for learning that and improving resources and skills is crucial, and something that, you know, my organization at least is expanding upon, and I hope to learn from others who perhaps have already built out a lot of these things as we go along here. As a volunteer, understanding the scope of your role and understanding the roles of others in the organization, other volunteers, interns, staff members, the CEO, who knows? Do you know how this organization uses volunteers? Are there opportunities to expand or shift roles as a volunteer? Can you clearly identify what staff members do at this organization? If you can't, perhaps advocating for yourself, asking questions, asking for clarification might be the next step in that process to better understand not only your role, but what else is going on at the organization with whom you're working alongside. Keeping in mind, and I mentioned this in other responsibilities as well, but keeping in mind other things that are going on. We recognize, and we hope that volunteers recognize, that this should not be your entire life. It is not for staff members. We are all people beyond our work, and keeping that at the forefront, keeping mindfulness practices, keeping mental and emotional health, at the forefront is crucial for the success as a volunteer, for your continued involvement in an organization, and for an organization themselves. Keeping in mind when this might be going beyond being helpful toward this is all consuming, I feel personally compelled to help in more and more ways. That is fabulous, and often we are pulled into volunteer work or pulled into a helping profession because we want to make a difference. However, stepping beyond that and sort of ignoring boundaries, whether with colleagues, clients, volunteers, your own sort of other obligations and other responsibilities outside of this role, can lead to burnout. And we don't want that. We don't want volunteers to constantly turn over. Speaking as someone from an organization, I ideally would like to build that long-term relationship with folks who want to come back. I get to know you, I get to know your friends, your family, you know, what do you like to do? I can ask about your recent vacation. That's the type of relationship that I'm personally looking to build in my organization, and hope that you as a volunteer are also looking to build some sort of relationship Whether or not that goes that deep or is more surface level, totally up to you. But keeping in mind mindfulness practices, breathing, taking time away when you need to, and understanding that you might be feeling signs of burnout, and likely some staff members might be feeling signs of burnout. So being patient with one another is always key. As an organization, and this is where I will say a huge caveat, I myself, in the way that I come at this work, I largely see organizations responsible for setting clear-cut roles and boundaries for their volunteer network, for themselves, for whomever within the folds of their confines, within their collaboration or in their partnerships, all that jazz. The more we can share as an organization, as transparently as we can, the better volunteers will understand not only their roles, but the ins and outs of our organization itself. So assessing your needs at the get-go, whether you are a young organization or a well-established organization, continually assessing your needs. What are volunteer responsibilities versus staff member responsibilities? Where are those roles differentiated and how are they differentiated? Where are the strengths of using volunteers? And where are there some sort of pain point or opportunities for growth, opportunities to reinvent our relationship with volunteers? And how can we then provide the best training and onboarding that we can in order for everyone to succeed at the end of the day? Assessing your current training and onboarding materials looks somewhat like asking these questions. It could be other questions depending on what your onboarding might look like. What's currently provided? What sort of steps do folks need to complete before they become a volunteer? For our organization, that's a few required forms. It's a background screening. They go through training, all that jazz. That might look a little different from your organization depending on the size, the scope of your work, what have you. But what is currently being provided? What challenges have already arisen? What might arise? Anything you can think of as potential pain points, points that are not quite clear. How can we go about making those super duper clear and reiterating those points and importance over and over again, or circling back to and continually reminding folks that these resources are there to help? And lastly, what can be improved upon? Where can we expand resources? Where can we provide additional opportunities? Of course, this will have to take into account your staff capacity, what your team might look like as an organization, but also what might work best for volunteers. Does that look like an evening or weekend training or workshop or activity to support volunteers in their learning? Or does that look like a morning coffee activity? Is that in person or are we talking virtual? What works best for your organization? What works best for your volunteer network? What works best with your collaborators? Volunteer recognition. Volunteers are extremely vital to the work that we do at organizations, and we need to remind them of that and appreciate them for all of the work that they complete. Things that could be taken into consideration: volunteer spotlights if you have social media, highlighting volunteer work, sharing volunteer stories, asking them to contribute to your newsletter or a blog that you have online. What else might that look like? Sort of thinking through different opportunities for folks to get involved and share their why, share their story, share their impact building. That might also look like events specifically for Volunteer Appreciation. Volunteer Appreciation Week was a few weeks ago, but never too late to celebrate. We can always build out additional opportunities, whether that's a pizza party or a in the park meetup, or perhaps sending swag along if you have capacity at your organization, or simply sending a heartfelt letter. Stationery is probably the cheapest of most of those options, if that is sort of a barrier for your organization. But actually handwriting something can really make a meaningful impact for folks. I absolutely love getting a handwritten letter from folks, and I assume many others do, but taking time either out of your day or asking colleagues to sign on to a letter, just sign their name onto, an appreciation note, and sending that out to volunteers can really sort of help folks feel a part of the organization, because they truly are. They are bridge builders. Volunteers are ambassadors. They are recruiters in many ways. Word of mouth can either sort of make or break your recruitment efforts. And volunteers are change makers. They're looking to support the work that you do. They're looking to support the work in the community, and understanding that this is only one aspect of their lives, but appreciating them for all of the very hard work that they contribute to the mission, to the organization, to the overall goals of the team, is absolutely crucial. And I cannot underscore that enough. Ongoing relationships with volunteers. What additional training or workshop, what additional communication might we build out as an organization when we see gaps, when we see that roles are not clearly defined? How can we adapt that and provide an updated workshop, an updated training, additional materials, a handbook, a guide, resources, and not feeling like you have to create that yourself, but borrowing from other organizations that are doing well and succeeding in this area. I found great success in sort of looking at what other folks are putting on their website as sort of a transparent outline for volunteers as they first meet you at your website. What can we clearly state there versus what should be sort of drilled down a little deeper in through trainings, through workshops, through orientations, things like that. Having difficult conversations, even though they're difficult, even though they can be awkward, having those difficult conversations nonetheless will only aid in the success of your volunteer growth and the relationships you're building with your volunteers, as well as the image, the organizational goals, so on and so forth. And I skipped over there the last one because I folded it in, but providing additional mechanisms for feedback, whether it's listening events, whether it is continually saying and reaching out to folks and asking for their feedback. We are not stuck to any sort of rigid plan here. We're ever evolving, we're ever changing. Please tell me, how can I better support you? How can I build out this training material to better suit your needs? Or even better, I'm building a guide. Will you take a look at it and give me feedback? Much like writers get feedback on manuscripts, they have editors for that exact reason. We can utilize our volunteers for much more than simply completing tasks and assessing and transforming the organization, but also in building those structures that will help other volunteers succeed. So asking for their input is also something to keep in mind. Challenges will inevitably arise. It's just how it goes. As we're building relationships, as we're getting to know one another, as that relationship is evolving, and as those roles are shifting and evolving. Understanding when challenges need to be addressed, either one-on-one with you or another colleague working directly with a volunteer, or as a volunteer, who should you go to? Do you know who you should go to? Might be a good question to ask as well. Understanding and being fully transparent on what that communication looks like, setting up a meeting and outlining an agenda so folks know why they're showing up to a meeting. We never want folks to feel like they are in trouble or being called to the principal's office, essentially, but establishing an open forum and an open means of communication for sharing experiences. Curious to hear what you interpreted from that. Here's how I interpreted it. How can we move forward in this relationship? And reinforcing the need for understanding rather than blaming. Well, you did this, that wasn't clear. Absolutely. We can be fully recognize the ways in which we have failed or in which communication has failed. But how do we go about remedying that for the success, for the benefit of our relationship as an organization and volunteer? What resources were provided? And again, this is just sort of circling back again and again. You'll see this over and over. Resources and materials, what has currently been provided? What are you currently in the midst of building? What might we be looking to build in the future? And getting feedback on that might be helpful in those conversations. If folks don't fully know what's going on at the rest of the organization or what their role looks like versus a staff member's role or another volunteer's role, perhaps they need specific materials or guides to explain that. And that's certainly something that an organization can provide and can certainly ask volunteers to help sort of look over. Is this clear? Does this make sense? What else should I expand upon in order for you, your team, your network to fully understand the scope of your role and the role of the organization? Getting buy-in from all stakeholders and setting expectations and a plan. Clarity, as I've mentioned before, clarity, transparency, whenever possible, is key in order to go forward in your relationship. Of course, there will always be times in which it might just not be a good fit, either as a volunteer working with this particular organization or as an organization and a volunteer's needs and expectations coming in versus what tasks you need completed. And having that open and transparent conversation of, hey, look, I just don't think now might not be the best time for this. However, we are looking to expand our areas in this way, or we are looking to perhaps expand a role in this way. Might that be of interest? How might we work together in the future? Or can I put you on my list to reach back out to if, when XYZ arises and we do expand in that area? Keeping in contact and being fully transparent about what your needs are, rather than sort of making up responsibilities, rather than making up roles and things to do, tasks, when they might not be the best fit, is crucial. And not sort of, I heard this at another presentation, so I'll steal it from there or borrow it, excuse me. Not sort of owning volunteers, but knowing that that relationship, while it might not work best for your organization, they might find another organization that is doing exactly what they want to do, and not sort of taking that too personally if they go somewhere else and find exactly what they need in an exact volunteer role that fits their skill set and what an organization needs when you might not have that outlet at the moment. Rather than me sort of blabbering on continually, now is the time where we are going to step into case studies. So first I'll explain it and then we'll dive in. So hold on, don't panic too much here. We'll have 10 minutes in breakout rooms to discuss one of two case studies. Case study 1, it will be odd number breakout rooms. Case study 2, even number breakout rooms. And I will pop the link in the chat in just a moment. As you discuss and as you read through very short, very brief, relatively vague case studies, we do hope that you share with one another your reactions, additional information that you might need either as a volunteer or as an organizational team member, potential boundaries that might need to be filled out. And there's a few questions within the case study to get you going. We have a mural workspace and instructions will be on the PDF. So again, if you're new to mural, no worries. Mural allows you to add sticky notes, add comments, add pictures or other fun characters to help convey your point of view or what you're trying to get across. We will use mural, one for each case study. So keep in mind that multiple groups will be adding to that one space. So if you see other notes, it's likely because other folks have the same thoughts as you. It's okay to have duplication. It's okay to like it. It's okay to like thumbs up it or exit or, check mark to add in your thoughts, whatever might be helpful for your own thinking or for your group. I think I'm over explaining now, so I think we'll just dive in. One moment while I share the link with y'all in the chat here. You should be able to access it in the chat. Please feel free, let me know if you cannot access it, but it should be a PDF, instructions at the top, case studies 1 and 2. They're very brief, very vague, so that you can hopefully interpret them yourselves and add in a lot of thoughts there. Please also keep in mind that these case studies are coming from my own context of a refugee resettlement organization, so they might not necessarily align with your work or your organization, but nonetheless, I hope they're helpful. Thinking through things you may or may not have included, potential boundaries to set as a volunteer might include things like frequency of updates, communication, and expectations for communication from both parties or from all parties if there are more than two, when or who to reach out to when XYZ happens, when things go awry or when you have a question or things are unclear, when you can take the lead and when you should step back and ask for further clarification from an organization or to sort of notify an organization of the information that you've learned through your experience or working directly with a client, so on and so forth. Tasks you are or are not comfortable completing. Perhaps you don't want to be lugging furniture in and out of an apartment. And that would be something that you should let folks know if you are ever asked to do something like that, and sort of establishing things that are within your wheelhouse, things that you might be comfortable exploring, the little beyond those bounds, and then things that are just, not really up for a discussion. They're off the table. I'm just, I'm not going to do that, sorry. But of course, saying that in a very kind and patient way rather than what I just did. Questions, concerns, and any training needs you might have. Having some form of feedback loop, some way to provide constructive criticism. And again, you'll be able to provide constructive criticism to me and this presentation, but I also hope that you are able to provide constructive criticism, an opportunity for growth as you're working with an organization or as you're working with potential organizations, sort of exploring those new opportunities, new relationships. On the flip side, as an organization, you might be looking to establish responsibilities asked of volunteers versus staff members, working hours, and response time, especially as your sort of landscape ebbs and flows depending on your fiscal year, what other events and tasks might need completed, inundation of other work that has sort of had to, put things on the back burner, and being transparent about that when those things arise, as well as a point of contact for volunteers. And if you have multiple points of contact, who to reach out to in different scenarios. You should first reach out to this person, and if they don't respond within whatever time frame, reach out to this person. We're here to help. Like, here's an emergency, sort of here's how to reach our offices. You can always reach someone there, so on and so forth. Information that can and cannot be provided to volunteers. For example, because I work at a refugee resettlement organization, there is some information, that we do provide to volunteers. And we have found that some folks are frustrated that they cannot be provided more information. However, being clear on information and confidentiality practices that we hold in our clients' best interests, in acknowledging, what information we actually cannot provide for legal reasons, for the, ethical standards that we hold at our organization, so on and so forth, and sort of explaining that in some way that doesn't say, no, I can't give that to you, but really explaining the why as well. Conversations volunteers will and will not be part of, realities of organizational capacity, especially if you are a small organization or if you are being pulled in multiple different competing directions. Being transparent and realistic about that really helps set those expectations and can help define what roles look like now versus what they could look like or what they have the potential to look like in the future. Realistic timelines for trainings, resources, guides, responses, all that jazz. Those are just a few examples of what you might have included, and hopefully you've thought up even more than what I've provided, but that hopefully is a helpful starting point as well. At the end of the day, as a volunteer and as an organization, we must always keep in mind our end goals. How do we want to work with one another? How can we work to improve our relationships? And how should we go about establishing or renewing those relationships that might have gone to the wayside or fizzled out for whatever reason? Your time commitment and being very realistic about other things that you have going on, whether it is the time commitment you have as a volunteer to support staff, clients, events, the organization's administrative tasks, so on and so forth. And as an organization, the time you have and the time you are allowing for those listening sessions, for those feedback loops, for those touch bases, for training and supervising of not only volunteers, but colleagues that might be working directly with volunteers. And the time it might take to listen and adapt those programs, those training modules, those resources, those guides, setting aside an hour or a day, if you can, to do that might be helpful, but also being realistic if that's just not at all possible for you right now, given the other responsibilities you have. The freedom you have and the flexibility, the freedom as a volunteer to work on other tasks or the requests from organization, the autonomy you have when taking on new responsibilities, and how flexible the organization is in your particular volunteer role. Is there room for, pivoting? Is there room for expansion? Is there room, or how could that adapt? As well as the freedom and flexibility you have as an organization to allow volunteers to take the lead on a project or task, as well as when they should sort of step back and adhere to, or when they should adhere to strict rules, roles, guidelines, sort of other mandated responsibilities that they should know about. Assessing and keeping in mind your strengths and knowledge gaps. As a volunteer, your strengths and knowledge in a particular area, work, life experiences, languages that might be beneficial to an organization, and as an organization, the processes, responsibilities, laws, regulations, organization systems. I could go on for ages here. And last and certainly the most crucial, as we sort of keep touching upon throughout our time together, the relationship that you're building. Understanding people are only human and mistakes and miscommunication can happen and likely will. Understanding you might not have the full picture of what's going on. And instead of playing the blame game, seeking clarity and understanding. Strategizing how to recover when there are challenges, when there is friction and misunderstanding. And always, always leading with kindness and empathy. Giving grace to yourself, but also giving grace to one another. Happy to spend the last 6 minutes free chatting and answering any questions that folks might have. I have a few resources that I'm happy to share that I found helpful as an organization and sort of building out materials, and in the works of adding things to our website as well. But if you'd like to keep the conversation going, or if you have to run to other things, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to set up a call or chat via email, whatever might be most helpful. Again, Taylor Donaldson. My email is tdonaldson, my first initial of my first name, my full last name, @iine.org. I'll also pop that in the chat because I am eager to see folks' faces rather than my screen here. And it looks like Elise, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name, but please go ahead.
Hi, no, you pronounced my name correctly. It's Elise, and I'm joining you from Phoenix, Arizona, where it's quite early in the morning. So that's why I'm not on video right now. Just wanted to let you know I really enjoyed the presentation, and I'm just wondering if you have any tips. If, I looked at the slide of like signs of boundary concerns, and I'm like, wow, my organization is experiencing all of these. How can you kind of start the process of addressing them and getting your organization on track when some of the issues are, in roles that are kind of above you, or just not within your direct scope of your role?
Absolutely. I gather you are not alone and in sort of looking through things and going, yikes, that's not good. My one piece of advice and how I have always done things at my organization and past organizations with whom I've worked is being very open and transparent with the volunteers within your network at, hey, look, here's where we're at. Here's my end goal, but like I do need you to know here is where we're currently at, and here's how we are looking to grow or expand or shift our relationship and the ways in which volunteers are utilized and appreciated within our organization. First, just sort of being really clear and transparent of like things are not perfect as they are, nor will they ever be. We're always evolving and improving. But thinking through ways in which your organization can enact change when you yourself cannot enact all of those changes, very relatable as well, I have first built out trainings and guides for volunteers. If that's something within your purview or something that you or a colleague or a team can work on producing, I found that really helpful in just making sure folks understand what all our organization does, what staff responsibilities are versus volunteers, and really clear-cut guides and manuals and training materials if you have time. And I say if because not everyone has the capacity to do that, not everyone has the staffing to do that, not everyone has the ability to take that much time out of their day to build out these resources. But if that is available, thinking through what information might volunteers just be missing? What might they not know about your organization? And going from there. And certainly if you have a trusted group of volunteers, if you have folks who are giving great feedback or are your sort of go-to people for getting things done, asking them, hey, I'm working on improving this, full transparency, it's nowhere near completion, but I really need your feedback and would really appreciate any constructive criticism you have. Again, because we can produce things all we want as an organization, but if there still remains gaps, it's not going to be helpful for the volunteers. And then sort of working that way up the food chain, whatever that looks like at your organization, and getting things sort of signed off by others who need to approve of those things before they sort of go live. But really getting feedback, I would say, has been really helpful for me in the work that I do. So I hope that helps, Elise.
It does. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm curious to hear, and if others feel comfortable sharing, either unmuting yourself or raising your hand or just popping it in the chat, what areas do you hope to improve upon for yourself or as an organization? And I recognize we're coming to a close here. So, so things to think through or add into the chat if you have just a moment. But I recognize I think we're at time here. So I hope that you feel comfortable emailing me, please don't hesitate. I'm happy to continue the conversation. And with that, thank you all so much for joining me. It's been a lovely hour and 15 together.